One last message. Please don't ignore me. Ethan stared at his phone for what felt like hours, reading the same conversation again and again. The screen was filled with old messages that once made him smile. But now every word felt like a reminder of what he had lost. Emily had stopped replying. 3 weeks ago, there had been no argument, no dramatic goodbye, only silence that grew heavier with every passing day. Friends told him to move on, saying that if someone wanted to stay, they would. He tried listening to them. He deleted her pictures, then restored them. He blocked her number, then unblocked it before the day ended. Every morning he woke up hoping to see a notification from her, and every night he went to sleep disappointed. Still, something inside him refused to believe their story was over. He remembered the rainy afternoon when they first met at a quiet bookstore. She had accidentally dropped a stack of novels, and he helped her pick them up. They laughed over the awkward moment, and spent hours talking about dreams, music, and places they wanted to visit. It had felt effortless, like they had known each other forever. Months later, they became inseparable. They celebrated birthdays, survived difficult days together, and promised they would always communicate no matter what happened. That promise echoed in Ethan's mind now, because communication had become the one thing missing. He replayed every conversation, wondering if he had missed a sign that she was unhappy. Maybe he worked too much. Maybe he forgot important dates. Maybe he failed to notice the sadness she was hiding. The questions never stopped. His best friend Daniel invited him out almost every weekend to distract him. But Ethan always found himself checking his phone every few minutes. Daniel finally sighed and said, "You're waiting for someone who isn't coming." Ethan forced a smile, but didn't answer. Deep inside, he believed people didn't disappear without a reason. One evening, he walked past the little coffee shop, where he and Emily used to meet after work. Their favorite table near the window was empty. He ordered the same drinks they always shared, and sat there alone, hoping memories would somehow give him answers. Instead, they only made the silence louder. The waitress recognized him and quietly asked where Emily was. He simply smiled and said she was busy. Saying the truth felt too painful. Days turned into weeks. His birthday arrived without a single message from her. He spent the evening with his family, pretending everything was fine. But after everyone went to sleep, he stared at the blank chat once more. He typed a message, erased it, typed another, erased that too. Nothing felt right. He didn't want to sound desperate, angry, or guilty. He just wanted honesty. At midnight, he opened an old notebook where Emily had once written, "No matter how hard life gets, promise me you'll never stop believing in people." Reading those words brought tears to his eyes. She had believed in hope more than anyone he had ever known. If she could write that, why had she disappeared without explaining anything? The contradiction hurt more than the silence itself. Ethan closed the notebook and looked outside his apartment window. Rain slowly covered the streets. Just like the day they met. He remembered how she always loved rainy nights because they made the city feel peaceful. Suddenly, he realized he had been holding on to memories instead of seeking closure. Maybe she truly wanted to leave, or maybe something had happened that he didn't understand. Either way, endless waiting was slowly breaking him. He opened the chat one final time. His fingers hovered above the keyboard for several minutes. His heart raced as if every word carried the weight of an entire lifetime. Finally, he began typing. "Hi, Emily. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I needed to say something. I've spent weeks wondering what happened between us. If I hurt you, I'm truly sorry, because it was never my intention. If you simply chose a different path, I will respect that. I only wish I had known instead of creating 1,000 painful answers in my own mind. You once told me honesty was kinder than silence, and I've held onto that belief ever since. This isn't a message asking you to come back. It isn't meant to make you feel guilty. It's only a goodbye to the questions that have kept me awake every night. I hope you're healthy, safe, and finding happiness wherever life has taken you. Thank you for every memory, every laugh, every lesson, and every dream we shared. You changed my life in ways you'll probably never realize. If this is truly the end of our story, then I hope one day we both remember each other without pain. This is my one last message. Please don't ignore me. Even if your answer is only one sentence, it would mean more than you know. Ethan read the message 10 times before pressing send. The screen immediately showed one small word beneath it. Delivered. He placed the phone on the table and closed his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he felt strangely calm. He had finally said everything his heart had been carrying. Whether she answered or not was no longer something he could control. Outside, the rain continued falling quietly, washing the streets clean, while Ethan wondered if it could also wash away the sadness he had carried for so long. Morning arrived with soft sunlight filling Ethan's apartment, but he didn't reach for his phone the way he had every other day. For the first time in weeks, he made breakfast without thinking about notifications. He told himself that whatever happened next was out of his hands. Still, when he finally picked up his phone before leaving for work, his heart skipped a beat. There was one unread message. It was from Emily. His hands trembled as he opened it. The message was short. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Can we talk tonight?" Ethan stared at the screen, reading the words over and over until they finally felt real. It wasn't the emotional reunion he had imagined countless times. It was only one sentence, but it was enough to replace weeks of painful silence with a tiny spark of hope. The entire day felt unusually long. Every hour seemed slower than the last. He tried focusing on work, but his thoughts kept returning to the conversation waiting for him that evening. At exactly 7 o'clock, his phone rang. Emily's name appeared on the screen. He took a deep breath before answering. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Emily quietly whispered, "Thank you for sending that message." Ethan closed his eyes. Her voice sounded tired, weaker than he remembered. She explained that shortly after their last meeting, her mother had become seriously ill. Everything had happened so suddenly that her world turned upside down. Hospital visits, medical bills, and endless stress had consumed every day. She admitted that she wanted to tell Ethan everything but felt ashamed, because she believed she was becoming a burden. The more time passed, the harder it became to explain her silence. Every day she planned to send a message, but fear convinced her to wait until tomorrow. Tomorrow eventually became 3 long weeks. Ethan listened without interrupting. For the first time since she disappeared, the unanswered questions finally had answers. He wasn't angry. He was simply sad that she had faced everything alone. Emily apologized repeatedly, saying she understood if he never wanted to speak to her again. Ethan smiled gently, even though she couldn't see him. He reminded her of the promise they had once made, to always choose honesty over silence. He admitted that the silence had hurt far more than any difficult truth ever could. Emily began crying softly. She confessed that reading his final message made her realize she had been running away from someone who only wanted to understand. They talked for nearly 3 hours, not only about the past, but also about everything that had happened while they were apart. There were moments of laughter, moments of tears, and long pauses where neither person needed words. Before ending the call, Ethan said something he had been thinking about all evening. If we're going to continue, we can't return to who we were before. We have to become better than that. Emily agreed immediately. Trust wasn't something that could be repaired overnight. It would take honesty, patience, and time. Over the following weeks, they met several times, not as two people pretending nothing had happened, but as two people learning how to communicate again. Sometimes conversations were uncomfortable. Sometimes old fears resurfaced. Yet every difficult discussion ended with more understanding than before. Ethan also realized something important about himself. During those weeks of silence, he had allowed his happiness to depend entirely on another person's reply. He promised himself never to lose his own identity again. He started exercising regularly, reconnected with old friends, and returned to hobbies he had abandoned. Emily noticed the change and admired his quiet confidence. She, too, learned that asking for help was not a sign of weakness. When life became overwhelming, she no longer carried every burden alone. Instead, she shared them with the people who genuinely cared about her. Months later, they returned to the bookstore where they had first met. The owner smiled as soon as he recognized them. Everything looked almost exactly the same, except for one small detail. This time, neither of them was afraid of silence. because they had learned that silence should never replace truth. As they walked through the familiar shelves, Emily accidentally dropped another stack of books. They both laughed, just like they had years earlier. Ethan picked up one novel and smiled. Some stories deserve a second chapter, Emily nodded. Only when both people are willing to write it together. They left the bookstore hand in hand, knowing that love was never about perfect moments. It was about choosing each other even after difficult ones. Life continued bringing challenges, but they faced them as a team instead of strangers. Looking back, Ethan often thought about that final message he almost never sent. If fear had stopped him, he might have spent the rest of his life believing he had simply been forgotten. Instead, one honest message opened the door to understanding, healing, and a fresh beginning. He also understood that not every story ends this way. Sometimes a final message receives no reply, and closure must come from within. But regardless of the outcome, speaking honestly with kindness is never a mistake. Years later, whenever friends asked Ethan about the greatest lesson he had learned, he always smiled before answering. Never let pride say the last word when your heart still carries the truth. Sometimes one message changes nothing. Sometimes it changes everything. But you'll never know if you leave your story unfinished. And somewhere in an old phone conversation, beneath thousands of newer messages, one simple sentence remained untouched forever, quietly reminding them both of the day everything changed. One last message. Please don't ignore me.